Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to this IORMA webinar. Before I hand over to the host for this event, I would like to briefly tell you about IORMA and the IORMA Futures Centre. IORMA is a foresight research organisation concerned with the accelerating and evolutionary future fusion of global advanced technology with global humanity. The IORMA Future Centre is a beacon of future positive hope, researching the future trends in technology and the impacts of evolving disruptive technologies, along with the positive hope that brings to humanity for a progressively better new world. IORMA provides a range of services to assist organisations, businesses, governments and academia in embracing the future and avoiding surprises. Once again, welcome and thanks for joining us today. We encourage you to type any questions throughout the event into the Q&A box and feel free to introduce yourself and pass any comments in the chat box. This webinar is being recorded.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Voice Assistance and Employment, How Speech Processing is Changing the Job Market. As voice assistance and speech recognition technologies continue to evolve, they are not only transforming how we interact with technology, but also reshaping the job market. From customer service to technical support, these advancements are redefining roles, creating new opportunities, and demanding a new set of skills from the workforce. In this session, we will delve into the impact of these technologies on various industries, explore the skills needed for emerging job roles, and discuss strategies for workforce adaptation. We will also examine whether industries and governments are truly prepared for the profound changes generative AI will bring to the employment sector. Let's get started on this critical conversation. I am Dr. Aga Hassan, a former Parliamentary Office Manager at House of Commons with a strong background in policy research, strategic communication, and parliamentary operations. I'm delighted to chair today's webinar on the impact of voice assistance and speech processing on the job market. Before we dive into our discussion, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please use this instead of the chat section to ensure we can see your questions. Now, let's start with a quick poll to get a sense of your thoughts on today's topic. The poll question, which you will be able to see in a second, is what global job opportunities are currently available in the speech processing market and how it will change in the near future. As you can see, you can vote on your screen. Now, moving on, we shall now move towards our esteemed panelists for today. Our first panelist today is Nigel Cannings, CEO of Intelligence Voice. Nigel, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
So delighted to be here. My name is Nigel Cannings. I'm the CEO of Intelligent Voice. We specialize in speech processing technology. I've been working in the speech and NLP industry for coming on for 20 years now, and qualified as a lawyer before that. So I have a big interest in the crossover between the kind of legal side and the ethical side of this, as well as the technology side.
Great to have you on board. Our second panelist is Sandy Tong, who works as a Principal Policy Officer, Innovation and Technology at Greater London Authority, GLA. Sandy, would you please like to say a few words?
Sure, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So my name is Sandy Tung. I lead on tech and innovation policy at City Hall, otherwise known as the Greater London Authority. As part of that, I'm supporting our Chief Digital Officer, Theo Blackwell, to look at AI and digitalization strategies. I also run the Mayor's Open Innovation Program, which looks to support innovators to create new solutions to solve public sector challenges.
Thank you, Sandy. Next, I'm very pleased to announce Tom Hadley, a speaker, a trainer, and content generator. Tom, please, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Great to be with you. So until a few years ago, I was the Director of Campaigns and Policy at the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, which is the professional body for recruitment and employment experts. So we did a lot of work there about how the labour market was changing, trying to impact the policy debate as well as around that. And then for the last few years, I work on my own account. I'm a public speaker mostly, but I do a lot of work with the ILO, the International Labour Organization. And I think what's interesting is in every single country, people are having this similar debates. And hopefully one thing I can bring to the party is examples from other countries about how those discussions are going there. And there is a lot we can learn, I think, from each other on this whole agenda.
Thank you, Tom. I'm sure our audience would like to know more about it. We also have with us Dr. Ori Igwe, a senior lecturer in law from School of Law, University of West London. Would you like to please introduce yourself, Dr. Ori? I think Dr. Ori is with us.
Yeah, so
Yes.
thank you, Julia, especially for inviting me to this webinar. Yeah, so I'm Dr. Ori Igwe. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of West London. I specialize in cybercrime, artificial intelligence, and law enforcement. So the topic we're discussing today is within my research area in terms of ethical and legal challenges and other aspects of AI as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ori. And last but definitely not the least, we have with us Julie Voll, Professor of AI and Advanced Computing at the University of London and IORMA Advisory Board. Julie, please, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Thank you, Eka. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today and participating in this conversation. As a professor of AI and advanced computing, I will be keen to share this recording with my students next term. So looking forward to what's being discussed.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that quick introduction. Now, I think let's kick off with our questions. But just before that, I would like to remind our audience once again that as participants, you can write the different questions that you might have in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen throughout the webinar, and we will go through as many of the questions as we can at the end. So let's start the question and answer. Let's start with Nigel. Nigel, first of all, congratulations on the release of your new book, Displacement Dilemma, Navigating Expertise in an AI-Driven World. It obviously provides valuable insights into the complexities of integrating AI technologies. Now, building on that, what are the biggest challenges businesses like Intelligent Voice face when integrating voice assistants into their daily operations?
Well, it's a very big area to unpack, but let's see if I can hit on a few specific areas. A lot of it depends, I think, on how close the voice technology gets to the consumer or the user. Actually, there are some common challenges. So let's talk about the common challenges quickly. So the common challenges are, particularly in the new world of voice assistants, which are generally Gen AI powered. It's dealing with issues around bias, around hallucination, around guardrails, and this comes to anyone who has any conversation about Gen AI at the moment is having this same conversation. There's a very famous recent example of the DPD chatbot, swearing at the user and trashing its own organization, and people like me go round the place, kind of looking for chatbots and voice assistants that they believe are powered by ChatGPT and trying to see if we can break them. I mean, we do that for fun, but it's actually there's a very serious side to it because you have to be really, really careful in terms of designing and implementing systems which you can, pretty much guarantee that the answers are going to be within a defined set of parameters. Now, the further away you get from the consumer, it's less of an issue. So say you use voice technology as a summarization tool, for example. So a lot of people now will be used to using transcription on Teams and then maybe having a summary afterwards. That's kind of less of an issue in terms of the answers it gives. It's important, but it's less of an issue. If I'm interacting though on a day, I'm actually chatting away to this chatbot, I have to make sure that system is very, very tightly defined in terms of the answers it's giving, what it's saying about my organization, even making sure that it's not biasing its answers based on simple things like someone's name just a name is enough to bias output from a chatbot. My name is Nigel. There's literally no one born after 1968 called Nigel. So that makes me a white male in my 50s or 60s. And that can bias the output. And people, when they're designing these systems, don't think about that. If you move closer to the consumer, then you have other problems as well. So things like integration, there's very practical issues around integrating voice technology into pipelines. We've got used to having them in the home now. So I'm not going to say this word loudly because otherwise my Amazon device will start shouting at me. But, you can say words in the house now and, voice assistants will start chatting away at you. Building that into a consumer pipeline, though, is a lot more difficult. Building it into a contact center, you're actually very much tied into the provider of that contact center technology often to enable you to do that. So there are some very practical challenges about implementing voice technology. As I said, there's a dozen other things, but there'll be plenty of other people who want to talk. So I'll just stop at that point on that subject, if that's okay.
Thank you, Nigel. I mean, yes, that's a common challenge that we hear about a lot in this kind of field. Moving on to the next question, Tom. I think you would like to answer this one. How much of an impact can the voice assistants have on employees in customer service and technical support roles?
Well, it's significant. Having said that, it's interesting when I used to speak to recruitment professionals and still do, one of the areas where it's hard to fill roles are in jobs like customer service, partly because there's a certain phone phobia amongst the next generation of people coming into the jobs market. So it's not easy to fill roles in those sectors anyway. So you could say, well, that's an opportunity to invest in some of the technology. But for those working in the sector, in those jobs, it is a concern for people who are thinking about jobs in those sectors. You're thinking, well, are there still going to be jobs there? And I think what's changing is this. It's the way forward is to invest to some extent. So you've got ways of responding to factual questions. You can relay information. That's why chatbots were so popular and continue to be so. What I'm seeing though is a kind of retraining. So people who are working in these sectors, it's not just so much about relaying information. It's more about your judgment, isn't it? It's about empathy. It's about being able to build a rapport. So that becomes the retraining, reskilling. So it's ironic, isn't it? So at the same time as we're talking a lot about this reskilling to the technical skills, I'm seeing a lot of employers actually investing a lot in almost the softer skills, the communication skills, the relationship building skills. And that's interesting. And just to conclude, in terms of the size of the challenge, 75% of employers globally, this is a Deloitte survey, say reskilling or skills is one of their major sources of risk. I thought that was quite interesting. And there's another survey that just came out from the World Employment Confederation, which is the global body for the recruitment sector. And they're saying 78% of business leaders are saying that we can't reskill quickly enough. So when we start coming up to answers to some of this, it's not just the what, it's the how. And often it's about how quickly can we drive some of this reskilling activity. And just a final thought, we talked about some of the sectors there and job roles that are affected. I'm very interested in people's views on this, but I'm picking up a lot from the creative industry sector. People who are voice professionals, voiceover professionals are losing a lot of work at the moment. So is that going to come back? So that's an interesting one. And the final area I'm interested in is HR, actually. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the HR community going forward in terms of how you implement some of these changes, but how your own role is changing on the back of some of this. And that's something perhaps we can talk about on some of the other questions.
Thank you, Tom. I have another question, which is actually relating to reskilling and upskilling.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great complement to what we just heard from Tom. Sandy, would you like to come in here? What support is available for the reskilling and upskilling workers who are displaced by voice and AI technologies?
So there are thousands of programs that are being run by service providers, colleges, and trainers across the city. If we're talking about London alone, you can. There are lots of different ways to access them. Whether you are a young person, someone who has recently become unemployed, or still employed by an organization. A lot of these courses can can be found via your local authority or through the Mayor of London's website. There are lots of ways to access those courses. However, I think there's a bit of a nuance to this conversation. I think taking a step back to look at like the wider picture, I think there is a bigger kind of conversation to have about whether it's people being made redundant or displaced from their jobs, or whether roles are actually changing within organizations. So we are seeing that a lot of jobs can be augmented by voice assistants, and AI voice technology can actually open doors to lots of more opportunities. But I think where the key is for employers to not just let go of their staff, but actually think about what are the more productive ways we can employ employees to make use of these technologies and actually become more productive. So I think some of what Tom had mentioned just now around improving the softer skills, these are the sorts of things that we are seeing employers should be investing in. Things like communication skills, leadership skills, problem solving. Those are things that will always be in demand and become more in demand as the voice assistants and AI technology can take over some of the more automated tasks. And another thing about the provision of skills, if you will, across a big city like London, it can be very hard to actually access those skills. As someone who just wants to find a training course to pick up digital literacy, for example, it can be overwhelming to understand where to start. And so the mayor has been investing in support to local authorities to actually integrate some of that service provision a little bit better, so that no matter what, where you're starting from, any resident or citizen can be able to kind of find the right training course for them. So there are boot camps and academies that provide these skills, but we are investing in trying to make that pipeline a little bit more understandable and more user friendly, so people don't get kind of overwhelmed by all the choices out there.
Thank you, Sandy. Thanks for that detailed response. That certainly gives us a lot to think about. We will move on to Julie next. Julie, how can educational institutions like UWL better equip students for the changing job market influenced by AI and voice technology?
Thanks, Aga. Well, it was interesting how universities can actually support both sides. So we support students to achieve their primary degree. So what we need to be sure of is that our students are equipped for the changing job market. Their careers are going to change drastically throughout their lifetime. And, going to what Sandy was saying about those soft skills like communication, critical thinking, problem solving, leadership, they are kind of mission critical. We need to be doing that. At the University of West London, we are a careers focused university. So there are many different ways that we work to ensure that our students are career ready, that they graduate and can go in and be successful in those graduate jobs. How do we do that? So we look at the courses that we deliver. We are fully engaged with local industry, and we want to be even more engaged. So we're always looking to make connections and collaborations with our industry partners or government partners to make sure that the skills that we are teaching, that our students are coming out with, they have those practical skills that they can walk into a job, learn on the job, train on the job, but they have an understanding of what they need to do on graduation. And we're always keen for industry experts across different areas, in this particular case, say computer science, AI, but we're hugely keen on people from industry to come and talk to us, talk to our students, give seminars, explain if you're going to be a junior data scientist, what does that job actually look like? So what we are teaching them is, if they're coming to do a flagship course like computer science, they have a very strong understanding of the theory of computer science. And they also have some practical skill set. But if they can get some information on what the job actually looks like, that helps us as staff and the students. If we can get students engaged with placements, that's fantastic, so that they have real experience before they go out into the workforce. Real industry-led research projects, so that could be at any level. So we look at our undergraduate students, if we have connections with industry to tell us these are the problems that we're trying to solve. Our master's level students can do that more in-depth theoretical analysis of problems, and again, further on with PhD. So having those connections with industry, such as the University of West London, where we're really focused on the careers, we need to be aware of how the careers are going to change over time, so we can make sure our students are prepped and aware of that, but also that the courses we're teaching are, state of the art, up to date, so that the students we're delivering onto the job market are ready to go.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I'm sure our audience, especially the students, find that answer quite relevant, especially given the current trends in the industry. Thank you so much. We have a question for Dr. Ori. Dr. Ori, can you please tell us what legal and ethical considerations need to be addressed as voice assistants and AI increasingly influence the employment decisions and job roles?
Okay, the first that comes to mind is accuracy and accountability. So we know that these voice assistants are actually getting their information based on data that they've been trained on. Sometimes the information they give out or the output they generate is really inaccurate. And so we have to be mindful about that. In terms of accountability, that's a very important one. Who do you hold accountable where, for instance, in a legal profession, lawyers or barristers give advice or make decisions based on information that they have obtained from voice assistants, and the information obtained is wrong. So you can't actually sue or hold voice assistants or AI tools liable or responsible in that scenario. So accountability is one. Another concern we have is in relation to AI voice assistants being unpredictable sometimes in the outputs or decisions they make. They don't offer any explanations or provide any explanations that therefore leads to a linked issue of there being no transparency in terms of how they arrive at decisions. So from a legal perspective, when you have a situation like that, where a voice assistant or a lawyer has given information or made legal decisions based on information obtained from AI tools or maybe voice assistants, which are incorrect, how do you explain to your clients the basis on which the outcome was reached if the advice you've relied on has had a negative impact on the client's case? Then you also have the issue of confidentiality as well. We all hear or know about voice assistants constantly being on. It listens to what we're saying. It listens to conversations. I have about 8 Alexas in my place, and sometimes it just starts getting excited, even when I haven't said anything. If you put that into a legal perspective, what happens if you have voice assistants that are constantly recording information that are sensitive or are linked to clients? Where does the data go? Who controls the data? If there is a breach of the confidential or sensitive data of the clients, who's going to be held accountable for that? So you have that link to privacy concerns as well, privacy issues. Now, we know lawyers have a duty to maintain the privacy and confidential information of their clients. And they're also under legal requirements to make sure that the client's lawyer privilege is not broken. When they now rely on voice assistants, that's an issue they face. Then you also have the other issue of voice assistants sometimes generating outputs that are biased because they're trained or on data sets that have inherent bias in them. So that could have a negative impact as well in legal decisions and legal outcomes. Now, the last point I'm going to make, I think this pertains to all sectors, is the fact that in many sectors, be it military, educational, legal, or even cybersecurity, there's this concern, almost arguably growing concern, that jobs are at risk of being taken over, not just by voice assistants, but by AI technologies in general. So you have this fear that you might have people losing their jobs, so job displacement brought about by AI. So that's the last ethical issue to think of.
Thank you, Dr. Ori. I think that's a very fascinating angle that you took. I definitely hadn't considered that before. Thank you so much. Coming back to Nigel. Nigel, could you please discuss how businesses can balance the use of analytical tools processing speech data for productivity without infringing on employees' privacy?
Oh, well, I think we could do a whole webinar on that one. But let's see if we can kind of package it down a bit.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of the things that the EU has tried to address in the new AI Act, and it in effect has kind of jumped up and down on the idea of using AI for employment-related decisions, shall we say? So let's say that you listen into people's meetings and you decide whether or not they should be promoted as a result of their behavior on that meeting. That would now be a high risk AI system. You'd find it very difficult to get that implemented in an organization. But for me, where there's an interesting kind of crossover here is for things like, say, mental health, for example. So I see that productivity tools can be looked at, say we talked about summarization earlier. So summarization of a meeting is great, meeting notes is great. As long as the data is being stored properly, as long as the data is being processed properly, as long as you understand where that data is being processed and by whom, you're fulfilling your GDPR obligations, then that's not really a problem. But you then begin to kind of get into this middle gray area where, from an employer's perspective, you might say, well, actually, if I have a tool which allows me to monitor the mental health of my staff, and I can see that someone is likely to be, my system says they're about to have a mental health crisis, is that infringing their privacy? Or is that actually something which is something which can be legitimately introduced into the workplace? And as I said, the EU AI Act is kind of tinkering around the edges of this one. And I think it's a huge ethical dilemma, which a lot of businesses are facing at the moment, because from an employee perspective, you might say, well, actually, that's a very big brother approach to things. You shouldn't be, using stress analysis tools to listen in and do that. And from the employer's perspective, you'd say, well, I might have just saved your life because I was in a position where I could actually help pull you back. And that's any job. It's not just a difficult, we've done work with kind of 999 call centers before, where you actually, it's a requirement to try and pull people back because they end up in stressful situations. It's actually something you want to do. But when on something like this, I'm on Zoom calls 4 or 5, 6 hours a day. I'm sure many other people on here are as well. Where do you draw that line? So I don't think there's an easy answer to that question, and it's something which I think you need to analyze on a case-by-case basis, depending upon the type of use case that you're looking to use the voice technology for.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I just ask a follow-up? Because the thought of a tool like that being used to monitor staff to detect mental health, I find that really uncomfortable. So do you think for a use case like that, do you think that the staff should be aware that a tool like this is actually running? Or would it be ethical to do that, to run a tool like that anyway?
I mean, I think that you need some form of consent. I was about to say informed consent, but who reads their employee handbook end to end? I mean, seriously, no one ever does. There's a sense of kind of semi-informed consent whenever you do these things. I mean, if you go into a job in financial services, for example, you expect to be recorded. If you are a trader in a bank, if you're in a call center, you expect to be recorded. It's actually part of your job requirement. For the rest of us, we're in this middle ground. I would actually want to see some pretty explicit consent to that, which says, I know full well that I am being listened into and I acknowledge it's for my own benefit. Of course, it's easy for employers to say, well, you either sign this to say you acknowledge it's for your benefit or you're not getting the job. So again, informed consent is such a difficult one. But honestly, Julian, this is probably a slightly controversial thing to say. If I had to pick one side or the other, I would rather have a tool running, if I could prove it actually worked, a tool running which could help detect potential mental health crises and was allowed the employer to step in than not. Because having seen the effect of untreated mental health issues and untreated stress in the workplace, I'd rather take the big brother approach if you had to push me to one extreme, which may be the kind of opposite end to where you're thinking on it.
Yeah, thank you. This is interesting. Now we're still understanding the capabilities of the technology which is available to us today, and then all the different use cases that it could be used for. Yeah, it's just interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. That is definitely some thought-provoking answer that was. Thank you so much, Nigel. Right, moving on. I think Tom would be best suited to answer this. Tom, how do you think voice assistance and speech recognition technology will shape the workplace, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think the pace of change will continue to ramp up. I think that's inevitable. I think there'll be more products, more services. I mean, we're already starting to see on primetime television ads about AI. I mean, would you have thought that a few years ago? I think this creates a number of challenges, though. So challenges for business leaders. So my work is primarily focused on talking to company bosses, business leaders around the world, and a lot of them are very honest. You know, they say, I'm quite overwhelmed by all this stuff, you know, so where do I invest? What tools do I need, etc. So I think that's one of the challenges in terms of how to keep up with the pace of change if you're a business leader. Solutions there, I think peer-to-peer group become more important than ever. I think events like today has actually become more important than ever. And there's a big role, I think, for representative business organizations. So whether it's a trade association, whether it's organizations that bring business together where you can share insight, I think that's going to be massive. The other implication, I think, in terms of the speed of change is the challenge for individuals. And we already live in an age where a lot of young people are very anxious, and it'd be great to hear from other people about this. I work for a youth employment charity called Youth Employment UK. They do an annual census, and there is a lot of anxiety out there about the jobs market. Only 50% of young people think they're going to ever find a good job, you know, which is horrendous. 1 in 3 people who are in work feel, actually, I feel totally confused by my work. I'm in work, but I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm not prepared for the world of work. So I think this idea of building better bridges between education and work is going to become more important than ever. And perhaps this final thought, I think trying to think on it on a company basis, I think the role of HR and recruitment professionals will be huge in the future, and partly because they are getting better at harnessing their own AI tools, which means you're freeing up more time for strategic insight, for building relationships, for having those sort of conversations that were not happening. Why? Because people don't have enough time to have the right sort of conversations. I think that's starting to change. So I think one of the areas of hope is that will be a driver of positive workplace culture, driver of collective energy within companies, etc. So I think that's one source of optimism for me is that role of HR and recruitment professionals going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I think that's a very relevant point at the end, and I'm sure it's something on the minds of many of the attendees today. Thank you so much. We'll move to Sandy. Sandy, what do you think? What are some of the steps can local government take to ensure that the advancement in speech processing technologies lead to the creation of equitable and diverse job opportunities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the goals that the Mayor of London has committed to is to create 150,000 good jobs by 2028. And so there's an emphasis on the phrase "good jobs," not just any kind of jobs, because it's widely kind of recognized that jobs in things like the gig economy are not well paid, have bad employment practices, and don't provide a kind of equitable outcome to most Londoners. And so kind of taking it's not just this doesn't just apply to the AI sector, but it's kind of a broad brush policy to kind of applies to all sectors. But I think for in particular for tech and where AI and voice assistants come in, it's especially important to kind of think about jobs that we are creating with the advancements of these technologies? What is the realm of the possible? I think one of the things that is really important to kind of influence employers, especially those that are able to, the big employers are able to recruit and retain large numbers of talent, is to implement standards like the Good Work Standard, which is to look at ensure that employers have fair paying conditions, really support meaningful workplace well-being, so supporting health and well-being, work-life balance, engaging with trade unions, supporting skills and progression, so not just hiring people for the skills that they currently have, but really invest in them as human beings and enable them to progress to higher skilled jobs, and using things like the apprenticeship schemes to support the upskilling, continued upskilling of employees, and also diversity in recruitment. And so equality, diversity, inclusion, and recruitment practices are really key as part of this Good Work Standard. And some of the things that we're kind of seeing, for example, through one of our innovation programs that we're running this year, we're supporting innovators to develop new solutions to support skills and employment, and we're seeing some really interesting possibilities out there where we can use AI voice assistants to help do coaching and mentoring to support people who are not able to get to the job center because of whatever conditions they have, whether it's a disability or they have kids to look after, or young people with special education needs. Like there are lots of, it kind of opens up a huge kind of a range of possibilities for people who haven't been able to access training to do that and get onto the job ladder. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that you could approach this.
Thank you, Sandy. That's very insightful perspective. Thank you for sharing that with us. Next question is for Professor Julie. Julie, what key standards do you believe need to be established or revised to ensure that voice assistant technologies positively impact employment opportunities and workforce quality?
Thanks, Aga. First, I could say I joined the British Standards Institution at the beginning of this year. And the first thing I would say is that for any standard to remain relevant and up to date, we need, the BSI needs experts from industry. So people who, as an academic, I can provide a kind of a theoretical viewpoint on technologies and the standards related to those technologies. But it's such a collaborative process in developing a standard, and it's I would say timely, if not lengthy, process for a standard to be developed. So those people, like in the room today, those people who are fully aware of the legal repercussions, the ethical repercussions, who understand the technologies themselves, how they're being developed, the impact they have, how the data is being used. So I think having the right people in the room, and for me, from my experience, is having those people from industry get involved with the BSI. So that's just an aside, so a call. But in terms of the technology related to voice assistants, yeah, there's definitely key areas where standards are being prepared. For example, I'm involved in standards relating to NLP. What are the major functionalities in NLP and how are they best evaluated? So if you were to create a new software solution with some NLP models, these are the tasks that you can achieve. These are the models you can use, and these are the best ways to evaluate them from a metric point of view, or a real world, how do we actually make sure this works in the real world with real data. So those kind of specific areas that we will be looking at would be interoperability. Can tech be developed that is not necessarily open source, that's key, that's kind of desirable, but kind of work across different platforms, devices? Is it open? Different ecosystems? Can these kind of technologies encourage collaboration across businesses, within businesses? Can technology be developed that kind of reduces the barriers to entry? So that would be the first one, interoperability. Data privacy and security, Nigel, Tom, Ori talked already about, we need software, AI-related softwares to be developed, which are aware of, the data that's being used to train these models, and, who owns the data, who is impacted by decisions that these voice assistants are making based on who is communicating with them. So data privacy, security, there are standards. They are continuously being reviewed and being kept up to date. That's hugely important. Another area which I think is interesting is inclusivity. So when we think about technology, and I talked about barriers for entry, but it's our technology is being developed for a fully wide range of users. So who is going to interact with that piece of technology? If we look at, who are the end users? If we think about potentially end users with disabilities, non-native speakers, so tech that's been developed in the UK or tech that's been developed in Europe. The big large language models are heavily trained on, for example, English would be one of the key languages. There are, we think about issues around low resource languages. There's over 700 languages in the world, and I think the large language models focus on a hugely small percentage of them. So for me, it's, and for me personally, as an Irish person trying to interact with my Alexa, it doesn't work very well. And so, how can we ensure that technology is created for people with different accents or dialects? So it definitely is that inclusivity. Is that the responsibility of the industry, of the developers, to make sure that tech is accessible? I think it is, as an academic. And I think there's definitely, there are standards that should be relevant to that particular thing. Ethical AI, we've talked about, the issues around data bias, bias in the original data, bias in the decisions that are being made. Ori talked about accountability, who is responsible for decisions made by AI model. If third parties are buying the software, who is responsible then? Transparency, etc. So yeah, I'll go back to my original statement. The BSI is doing fantastic work. It is based on collaboration, and the more experts who are actually working in the area get involved, I think the better. So if anybody is interested in getting involved with BSI, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. That's definitely some great points there. And I think building on that idea, looking at it from a legal perspective, I think Dr. Ori would like to come in on this question. Dr. Ori, how do you see voice assistants transforming legal professions, particularly in tasks such as e-discovery and compliance?
Yeah, so voice assistants, they have a very huge role to play in terms of e-discovery. They could help in processing digital evidence that's already been gathered as well. They could also help in reviewing the evidence that has been gathered, and especially in extracting relevant evidence, which makes it easier for lawyers to differentiate between legal relevant evidence that has been extracted and irrelevant evidence. And when that has been done, the relevant evidence is now put in legal hold, awaiting for the disclosure measures to be taken. So I think voice assistants play a very crucial role, given that most of the data in the legal sector, especially, are quite vast, and lawyers, barristers, and counsel are required to go through, peruse the data with a view to actually establishing what is relevant to a case, which aspect of the evidence would have to be served on the other party, because both parties are legally required to serve evidence that's being relied on one another, whether it's in civil cases or criminal cases as well. So voice assistants play a crucial role. When you consider the amount of data that they're able to analyze, process, review, and extract, you now understand that in doing so, it also saves time, meaning that lawyers now have more time to focus on more serious or demanding tasks that they need to rely on, while voice assistants are engaging on these aspects I've talked about in terms of extraction, reviewing, and processing data. So by giving lawyers more time to focus on other aspects of cases or hearings, then it becomes quite a crucial tool in enhancing productivity as well. Well, having said that, there are also concerns in relation to voice assistants, once again, in relation to how far can we go in relying on voice assistants in terms of e-discovery. I would argue that by using voice assistants and by saving time for lawyers to be able to focus on other aspects of cases that they need to focus on to get cases ready for trials, voice assistants are quite crucial in the legal sector. And this is more so because if evidence is not collected in an appropriate manner that complies with a set standard, any evidence that is not collected in the set manner is not going to be deemed to be what we call admissible in court. So it's quite crucial that voice assistants are used in a productive and positive manner in the legal sector to ensure that evidence that is obtained by e-discovery, all digital evidence obtained, whether it's from social media websites, USB sticks, emails, text messaging, instant messaging, video images, regardless of what digital source, that whatever evidence is obtained is evidence that can be rendered or deemed admissible in court. Because the danger is if e-discovery processes are not followed, cases might end up being thrown out or lost, which is why I would always argue that voice assistants play a crucial role in e-discovery.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ori. That is definitely a valuable insight. Thank you for highlighting that. Such a lively discussion going on here. I have some further questions. One of the questions is, which industries do you think are the most vulnerable to job losses due to advancements in speech processing technologies? And on the flip side, which industries are likely to benefit the most? Shall we start with you, Nigel?
I'm delighted you picked me for this one, because actually this is the focus of the book, and thank you very much for mentioning the book earlier. And just picking up on something that Ori said a second ago. The opening line of my book is, the legal profession is dead, it just doesn't know it yet. And actually, so there are a number of industries which are going to be massively impacted by voice technology, voice assistants, and by generative AI in general. And the legal profession is a huge one. So the giving of advice, let's just reduce it to the voice side. The giving of advice, it's expensive to go to lawyers at the moment. Most people don't have access to justice. If we can enable people to interact with what is effectively a legally trained large language model, be that using the voice, or be it over video, or be it even by text, we've massively increased access to justice, and also massively reduced the need for a lot of legal services. Because what it begins to demonstrate is that this is just unnecessary. But we've also got an expertise problem, and I've got a real issue with the expertise gap, which is going to be caused by the introduction of voice technology, of voice AI technology, and Gen AI generally. As I said, before I was a technologist, I was a lawyer. I trained as a solicitor when we didn't even call them trainee contracts. I was an article clerk. I was like an indentured servant to the person that I worked for. And I learned how to do that by doing things like going to meetings and taking notes, and that was charged to a client. I don't need to do that anymore. There's no need to have someone go to a meeting and take notes anymore. I was asked to review contracts. I did basic contract review. We don't need that anymore. Exactly the point that Ori's making, that this can be done. We're already seeing technology advancing so rapidly we're getting to the point where contracts will be drafted by AI pretty soon. So the legal profession as we know it will be decimated by voice technology and also by Gen AI. Call centers, I mean, crikey, we only have to think about the way I saw there's one of the questions in the chat about someone saying, well, voice interactions aren't very good. That's changing, and it's changing rapidly. And I think the trouble is there's people getting quite complacent at the moment, saying, oh, well, ChatGPT hallucinates and these chatbots aren't so great. I think the fact is we're seeing on an almost daily basis different ways of overcoming these things. And the ROI for the return on investment for businesses by taking people out of jobs which are customer facing is enormous. And the thing is, we're not replacing the expertise that these people would otherwise be gathering. So it's great to say we spend the next 5 years chipping people away out of businesses. And I think Sandy kind of touched on this as well. We start de-skilling businesses. But what happens when we suddenly realize that all of our experts have disappeared? We can't train them anymore. So I think that unfortunately, I'm not seeing a lot of businesses necessarily kind of creating huge employment from the use of voice technology specifically. Gen AI may be, but voice technology, I think, is going to be a lot about taking people out. Tom mentioned, creatives. I was recently thinking, well, there am I wrote a book. How do I get an audio book done? Well, crikey, I mean, I'd only need to spend $50 now, and I can get an app which will basically produce something which is perfect. Whereas previously I would have spent hundreds or thousands of pounds having that done. So I'm all about gloom as far as voice assistants and voice technology and the jobs market is concerned, I'm afraid. I hope someone has a slightly more positive spin on what voice assistants can do for the job market going forward.
Thank you, Nigel. I think Tom would like to come in here and perhaps share his thoughts with us.
Yeah, just a quick one. So I'm glad you mentioned the creative industry. So to be very specific, there are roles going, and voice actors and voice professionals is one area that's impacted, but not altogether. And what I mean by that, so if you're doing an advert, for example, the way it used to work is you'd bring in a voice specialist to help you model up the advert, etc. Now you're only bringing that person in for the final version. So there's still work there, but there's much less of it. And what's interesting is how that starts to change a sector. So all the big specialized agencies in voiceover work are going, but the freelancers are still there, which actually goes back to, I think, Sandy, you made the point. I think there's a big future for people working as freelancers, as independent professionals, because I think that's the way a lot of these jobs in the creative industries is going. So when we talk about preparing the next generation, I think there's a lot about the skills needed, the sectors that are going to be hiring, but understand the choices that you have in terms of ways of working. And some people like working as freelancers. They like working as independent professionals. And I think that has to be part of the bridge building activity is raising awareness amongst the next generation of different types of contracts and different types of work. So that, and just perhaps one final anecdote. So when we launched in my previous job, the Future of Jobs Commission, we made it the Future Jobs Observatory. We had a whole debate about what jobs are safe, what jobs are safe, and everybody's saying care work, where you're dealing with, we had an author who was part of the panel, and he said no. He said not even that, because in Japan they'd done these studies where they'd got the robot care workers. And what was interesting is people actually started preferring the robot than the people. So I just mentioned that as you jump to assumptions, and you always think, well, care work's definitely one area where you're never gonna change the dial on that one. But even there was some interesting counter arguments, and the experiment in Japan I thought was quite telling. So it's easy to jump to conclusions, and sometimes the reality is a little bit different.
Thank you, Tom. That is some great points there. I think we will take some notes from Julie, and then we'll move on to you, Sandy. Julie, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just thought I'd add my 2 cents. So as a lecturer in computer science, helping the next generation of graduates to prepare, I do think there will be demand for AI specialists, data scientists, voice UX designers. So all my computer science students, I think you're safe for a while yet. Thinking more about education in general, I think this type of technology can be hugely beneficial, in terms of providing personalized learning, that individual support to individual learners. How can they progress at their own rate with this type of support? It can help us as curriculum developers, content creators. But yeah, I think I can speak for myself in the UK. I think we're very privileged in the education system that we have, from primary, secondary, right through to university. If that level of education can be made more accessible globally, I think that's something that we should be striving towards. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Julie. We will move on to Sandy now. Sandy, would you like to come in now, please?
Yeah, thank you. I think just echoing to what Julie said, education, I think, is the sector that this is really kind of the most disruptive to education and skills building. I talked a lot about the many types of training that's available for Londoners to upskill, but there you have to kind of look at what the content of those courses are, and to be quite frank, a lot of these courses are training people to digital jobs that might not exist anymore in a 5 to 10 years time. So we kind of urgently look into what are we actually upskilling people to do. And so I think we need to kind of ensure that the skills and digital skills, especially, that we're training people to do are fit for for purpose, are kind of future proof. So that's one point. And I think the other point is, just more broadly speaking, in London, actually, we have a productivity problem. The productivity levels of London is not as good in comparison to other global cities like New York, Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, those types of cities. And one of the major problems is that there is a growing knowledge economy, but there is a lack of kind of diffusion of technologies and talent across different sectors, and not everyone is actually benefiting from these technologies. And so we're not just talking about big tech companies, but a lot of the economy in London is driven by small businesses, and so until the benefits of these technologies really filter to the small and medium enterprises, we're not going to see the benefits being seen across the board. And so I think there's just another point to kind of consider about whether we're really talking about sector, the technology disrupting a specific sector, or actually kind of benefiting the whole city as a whole.
Thank you, Sandy. That's very insightful. Thank you so much for that. I have this question. How, I think Julie touched on this before. How can advanced natural language processing technologies be leveraged to create more inclusive job markets, particularly for individuals with disabilities? So I think I will open it up to Julie, and then perhaps Sandy, you might want to chip in there as well. Julie, would you like to take on lead on that?
Yeah, it's only very recently that we have been able to interact with AI with a voice-driven interface. I think it's very early days that we can have AI working for us in that sort of a capacity, and I think it's very exciting. I'm personally very excited to see where it's going to go. So that ability to communicate in that way with AI that doesn't involve programming a script or interacting with a screen, I just think it makes it so much more, provides so much more accessibility for individuals, as I said, whether it's from a language point of view, or if there's visual, motor, cognitive impairments. It really does broaden participation in so even the digital economy, digital accessibility. I think this is a really important point. I've spoken about it before, but I think that's I'm going to stop at.
Thank you, Julie. Sandy, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, I think I mentioned already before some of the innovations that we're seeing that are opening up job opportunities to people that have been previously excluded because of disabilities or otherwise. And so there is a huge kind of potential for these types of technologies to help include make this a more inclusive job market. I think there are still many things that we are currently not doing enough of to increase accessibility. And so I think maybe it's partly looking at whether, for example, most websites, if you can see, are still do not fulfill major the kind of foundational accessibility requirements. Most people don't post pictures that include captions that visually impaired people can actually access. So I think we shouldn't forget those things and ensure that actually let's fix what we can right now before jumping to the next shiny technology, and also maybe look at the possibility of these types of technologies to be truly disruptive, and will it actually replace the need for us to create accessible websites? I'm not really sure. I think there are probably people more expert than I am to comment on that, but I think that's those are some of the things that we need to consider when we look at inclusive employment.
Thank you, Sandy. I think that's very important. Nigel would like to say something here. Nigel.
Yeah, sorry, just really quickly to pick up on this point. As Julie says, it's only really recently that we've actually been able to interact properly with voice. I mean, you have to look at companies like Amazon and Google have spent literally billions on failed projects. Like Alexa is a failed project. Google Home is a failed project in terms of what they were attempting to do, and have cost literally billions to get there. We're now finally at the point where actually you can begin to have a conversation with a computer. If you open your ChatGPT app now, you can actually talk to it and it will talk back to you in a reasonably intelligent and intelligible way. And it's actually an experience which designers have been trying to get to for many years. So I think that by building that level of inclusivity and accessibility, we're also actually achieving a number of the goals that certainly we in the voice industry have been trying to achieve for a very long time, which is to have a natural conversation with a computer. And for anyone old enough who remembers Scotty in one of the Star Trek films picking up a mouse and saying computer to it, the fact is we've long been aiming for this. So I think that this massively rapid advance that we've got will actually help not only with accessibility, but will also help achieve a number of the goals that we've tried to achieve for a long time in terms of human-computer interaction as well.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you for that. Moving on from that point, I have a question that is of legal nature, so I believe Dr. Ori would be best suited for this. Dr. Ori, do you see any major challenges for the companies that are trying to integrate this technology of voice assistants and AI? And perhaps, Nigel, you might want to chime in later on.
Well, the only challenges I could see would be in terms of the legal perspectives is how can voice assistants be integrated in such a way that they don't create legal or ethical concerns. I think that's the one thing I would say, because it's not just in relation to the legal sectors, literally in other sectors as well. You have the issue of people not being paranoid, but people just being concerned that voice assistants have the ability to listen. In addition to that, there's this concern that they record information and data, and it's unclear who owns the data, what happens to the data that has been recorded. Is consent obtained from owners or people whose data have been recorded? So in terms of data, creation of data, that's an issue. Then you also bring in a law enforcement aspect in relation to which jurisdiction is the data going to be stored in, which jurisdiction actually owns the data, where you have, for instance, a customer of a company residing in the UK, and you have a voice assistant in a different country recording information or conversation from a business company. Where is that data located? Who owns the data? So you have issues like that in terms of people being concerned as to what is happening with data that's being recorded, produced, and generated by all these voice assistant technologies. That is something that would really, really have to be overcome. And then we live in a diverse world as well. So you have people from different ethnic, racial backgrounds, not just in terms of race. You have people that have got disabilities, we just talked about as well. How will these tools be integrated into companies in such a way that it caters for diverse members of communities and the public as well? So this is what actually springs to mind in terms of trying to incorporate it. A challenge they might also face is in relation to finance, because it might be very costly to actually implement this in businesses as well. So it depends on the size of the business. Is it a medium-sized business, a large business, or literally a small business? Will they have the finance? Will they have to create an IT department that will be tasked with dealing with any problems that these technologies might throw up once they've been integrated into sectors as well? So you can see there are different challenges, I would say, companies might face. And before companies actually integrate it as well, I think they have to try and probably gauge as to see how it's going to have an impact on their business, whether their customers will be willing to embrace it. That's another thing as well. What impact will they have on the customers? Will the customers be willing to embrace it? Because it's not everyone that will feel comfortable or confident talking to voice assistants. I think most people probably would have started engaging in voice assistants after the COVID pandemic hit, I would imagine, because I was one of the people up until then. I never used to go to my bank, but once the COVID pandemic hit, two of my main banks relied on voice assistants to deal with standard routine customer service queries as well. So that's another challenge. I think it's good for business to integrate, but there's so many factors. The main one that springs to mind is legal and ethical concerns that might affect customers as well, and then how their customers will react to the technology as well.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ori. I think Tom would like to chime in here. Tom.
It was just a question to you all, actually. I remember years ago when we first started having the debate around how technology will drive inclusion. And I remember saying we've got to find, so we're not just talking a good game, you've got to be able to go to ministers and use examples, practical examples. So at the time, one example, for example, was new technology, which meant that people who were deaf or hard of hearing could work in call centers. It was working, you could see it. So I'm interested in any other examples from you guys about practical examples where technology, speech processing, whatever, is definitely helping the inclusion agenda. What barriers is it helping to overcome? I'd be really interested to get some real concrete examples of it in operation.
Right. I think this question is to all the panelists here. If anybody would like to chime in here. I think we will perhaps reserve this question for now, but if anybody would like to chime in at any time, we can definitely revert back. Yes, Sandy.
I could share an example of one of the innovations that one of our companies are working that we are supporting are doing to support Londoners into work. They're developing a new, basically like a AI voice coach solution, and basically the idea is, instead of having to kind of come into to do courses in person, it's a multilingual kind of solution that can speak your native language. And I think that's one of the things that has kind of really opened up doors, especially to people from like the migrant communities who are speaking languages that are not commonly spoken in training courses. It means that they are now able to access this content and help kind of get on the job ladder, help set up their own businesses in the comfort of their own homes. So it's just kind of opening that door to especially more vulnerable populations who may also be afraid to find to attend a class or to look for to go into a training program with other people. That this is kind of a first step to helping them understand what's possible and give them the confidence to either set up their own businesses or do something else. So that's one example that I might be able to share.
I think Professor Julie would like to say a few words here.
Yeah, another example would be, and it's very similar to what Sandy was saying, it's an AI coach to support students. So at universities, we would have these tools to support students through how to do recruitment. So, AI is being used in the recruitment process. We know that. So the tools can kind of help in two ways. One, they become familiar with interacting with AI in recruitment, so that when they do go out for their graduate jobs, that they're not completely thrown by that. But secondly, there are AI tools available that students can practice doing interviews. They can even get feedback on, how engaged they were with the conversation. Was the answer they were given, that verbal answer, actually responding to the points that would be expected, so they can even be scored. So it's a really fantastic tool. I think, I don't know how many of us have gone through recruitment where AI was used. I think I'm a bit too old, but I think all the generations of our students going out the door, many of them will be interacting with AI in recruitment, and if we can help them prepare for that, I think that's a very positive use of this type of technology.
Thank you. I think Nigel would like to say a few words as well. Nigel.
Yeah, if I can just drop something into the conversation here. One of the areas we've not touched on yet is the use of voice technology in healthcare. And actually, for me, it's probably going to be one of the most disruptive uses of voice AI, because it falls into, so just going back to Tom's question about sort of inclusivity and accessibility, and kind of riffing on what Sandy was saying there about the multilingual thing. There's a massive shortage of translation capability in the NHS, for example. And a lot of people have difficulty accessing medical services, and it's the same in criminal justice as well. There is an enormous shortage of translation services in the criminal justice system. We now are seeing systems which are capable of doing real-time translation and actually producing a voice at the other end. It's not 100% perfect, but I can do a pretty good job of getting you an English translation of up to 100 different languages pretty much in real time. I could demonstrate it to you scrolling on screen and vice versa. So, healthcare is one of those areas where I think that voice could have a massive impact. So we look at it there on the accessibility and inclusivity side, but it also touches on the previous question around the legal challenges, privacy. I mean, if ever, voice data is considered in the financial sector, for example, to be the most sensitive form of data, because it contains biometric information as well as other information. And it is going to be the same on the healthcare side as well. Huge amounts of data are being gathered. We know a lot about people from their voice. Julie throwing her hands up in horror at my mental health spy, but the fact is you can begin to tell sort of psychological changes and even certain physiological changes from the voice. So I just want to kind of throw healthcare as a whole industry into this debate about voice and maybe how that sits with the other panelists.
Can I say something about that?
Yes.
It's a really interesting point, because I was just talking to a Norwegian voice assistant company that is trying to develop solutions on to help basically translate different languages in the healthcare setting. And there is a huge liability issue currently that is preventing this from happening. The NHS won't touch this right now, and the reason it being, you can't. It's really difficult to take responsibility for a botched operation, for example, based on poor translation, a mistranslation. Someone has to take the responsibility, and it's a huge risk for the NHS to take on. However, I think it's a really interesting kind of topic to consider, because this could open up a huge a huge market. At the same time, if we are thinking about risk and liability and safety, we are looking at the most vulnerable populations that will benefit or suffer the consequences of this. The larger problem right now is just also that like the processes for hiring translators is not great, because usually you hire the lowest cost for the lowest cost translator, and you get a low a bad quality translator, and so wait lists for translators in hospitals is incredibly long. So there is a more fundamental issue about the process of how we're actually procuring the right solutions to support communities, and AI could be a factor in that, but until the kind of procurement processes and the way of looking at providing wraparound care is really kind of reviewed and kind of changed, I think there's a bigger problem to solve there.
Thank you, Sandy. I think Nigel would like to come here, but before
Sorry.
that, Nigel, may I please request to keep it a little bit short because I'm mindful of the time, please. Thank you.
Really quickly on the liability point, it is a massive issue with any Gen AI solution, and the closer you get to people, the worse it gets. I would propose there that we look to the airline industry. The airline industry actually manages to apportion. If a plane crashes, we have systems in place which apportion the way it's paid out using international conventions. Because if we didn't have those in place, you would never be able to fly on a plane. And it's kind of like it's something that government needs to take on, to say actually we accept the fact that there is a risk, but the benefits of flying potentially outweigh the kind of demerits of crashing. You could apply the same analogy potentially in the health service. And I will shut up now. Sorry.
Thank you, Nigel. That's valuable. Now I will go to the poll question. Sorry, not to the poll. I would like to go to the question that was submitted to us by the audience. We have first question from actually Sri Lanka that says, what global job opportunities are currently available in the speech processing market? How will it change in the near future? Julie, would you like to start?
Can you go through the question again?
Yes, of course. So it says, what global job opportunities are currently available in the speech processing market, and how will it change in the near future?
Yeah, I'm not going to take the question head on. I'll leave that to others. I will answer it from a university point of view. Our graduates are going to be going out into the global market, and what we are working towards, and at University of West London we've started working towards interdisciplinary studies, so that our students who are going out the door, whether they're from computer science, social sciences, that they are aware of AI and how it will be impacting their careers, but also that the technologies that are being developed, some of them, we've had great examples so far. What we want to ensure or promote is that the teams of people who are working on these types of tools, that they have an awareness of the impact of the technology, so that our computer science students or our PhD researchers, they are not developing AI models in a vacuum of a nice lab, but that they are actually involved in discussions with other fields. So we are promoting collaboration between our computer science, engineering, staff, research students with social scientists. We're really keen to work with criminology, with our legal. So that is something that we're working on at West London, is to have that conversation. Our social scientists, psychologists, they understand the human condition. They can explain that to us. So as a data scientist, developing a model could be about accuracy. How well does it work? Whereas we need, I think, a more broader understanding of the impact of the technology. So I clearly haven't answered the question in the way you wanted, but that's what I...
No, thank you for that, Julie. I think Tom might want to take on for this question as well.
Yeah, the most obvious is there'll be a huge need for coders, right? People who are coding stuff. So what's interesting now is I'm speaking to people in that sector and the coders themselves are using some of the technology to help with their coding. So they call it pair programming, where you're working in teams. Of course, this is all remote, so a lot of companies now have got people coding all over the world and working together. I think one program is called Code with Me, which helps to check coding, etc. So it's almost, so that's all kicking in. So so that's the most obvious one is ramp up the need for coding professionals.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. That definitely is very helpful as well. Now, I think Nigel touched on the question that we received earlier on in the chat, but I'll repeat that question one more time. It says, as a customer trying to resolve a problem, more often than not, chatbots rarely provide the resolution. Only a human's intervention sorts out the problem. How can customers be encouraged to embrace the new technologies in this way? Nigel, do you have any further comments on that?
Well, yeah, in a sense, the customer is going to end up not having a choice, because the only way you will be able to interact with most companies will be, well, it is through the channels which are provided. We've already seen, the death of email for a lot of companies. You need to go in through X, or you need to go in through some form of chatbot. What I think the thing for the companies is, it's understanding how you hand off the computer interaction to a human interaction. For me, that's one of the most interesting things about implementing this technology. You can, voice chatbots are reasonably good at the moment for providing, fairly simple information, but we are seeing techniques already which are increasing the range of questions that they can answer and interactions, and that's only going to get more and more. And particularly as AI becomes much more database aware than it has been, and we're seeing a lot of that ability. But I think what we really need to see is the ability for the voice chatbot, for the voice assistant, to know when it's hit its limits, and then to hand over to a human being. There will always need to be humans in the loop somewhere, for ethical reasons. It'll need to be there for review reasons or for expertise reasons. But I think, to answer the specific question, you're not going to have a choice, because it will be the only way you can interact with many organizations in the future.
All right. Thank you, Nigel. Professor Julie, please.
Yeah, I think to have society become comfortable with AI, I think we do need education. There has been great work in digital literacy, cyber literacy, understanding cybersecurity. There's been work between, universities, government, to ensure that the public has guidance, support, understanding. And I think for AI, as it's moved so quickly in the last couple of years, I do think that kind of AI literacy is something that we need to focus on as well, and can help with this.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, so these were some of the questions that we had from our audiences. Now, I think it's time to go towards our final question, or some final thoughts from our panelists. The question here is, what emerging technologies do you believe will further disrupt traditional job roles in industries reliant on speech processing? Would it be okay to start with you, Tom?
Well, I don't know if it will be anything dramatically new. I think things will evolve in terms of the speed of things. Like we heard about translation, that's very interesting. I was working on an ILO project in the Indian Ocean, and a lot of the issues was about health and safety for migrant workers, and there the investment was actually in the technology. So I think it's the speed at which it can be done. Whether there'll be totally new things that come out, I don't know. I mean, could you see? I don't know if anybody's been to see Aber Voyage, but could we see more of that sort of technology used, so you have that sort of human interaction potentially? I mean, not that long ago, I went to a conference. It was recruitment robots. I don't know if you've seen that, where it's literally like a severed head on a table. You walk into a room and you're interviewed by a robot. So, and the idea is it's a very objective recruitment process, and it takes the bias out. And we know there's pros and cons of that. So that's another example of redeploying the technology in a different way, which is at the interview stage. So I think that's the way it will go. It will continue to evolve. A lot of this commercially driven. People are looking for, for their own niche. So there'll constantly be new products out there. And I think that's the biggest challenge, certainly for business leaders that I speak to, is like, how do we choose? How do we know what's good? And I think that's why there's a role for coming together. And as I said right at the start there, there's a big role for business networks, for trade association, business, bring people together so you can have these sort of discussions, because if not, it's very hard to make the right call.
Thank you, Tom. Some very last minute thoughts from Sandy. Sandy, the question is, what emerging technologies do you believe will further disrupt traditional job roles in industries reliant on speech processing? Please, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I think kind of just building on what Tom said, that there's so much choice out there, and like new technologies, new solutions based off of AI and voice assistants are being produced at a rate that's just like phenomenal right now. And there's a big risk here for us to, where companies end up deploying bad tech or deploying tech badly, and so you end up with a lot of mediocre output out there, and
I think we might have
doesn't
lost.
actually solve
Yeah.
productivity problem. It's not actually helping. Sorry.
I think we lost you there for a second, Sandy. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's better. Would you
Yes,
like to
I can hear you. I'm so sorry about that.
That's quite fine.
I'll just quickly finish my point. It was just
Yes,
like, I think we just need to ensure that we deploy the technology in a way that actually produces the good outcomes, and not to just kind of look at the shiny new product and implement it badly.
Thank you, Sandy. That's very helpful. Dr. Ori, would you please present some final thoughts on the question about emerging technologies and how will it disrupt the traditional job role industries? Would you like to care for a final comment, please?
Oh yeah, I wrote an article recently on the implication of AI in general into different sectors, and what I would say is my main concern is the one impact it could have is in relation to possibly people either being displaced job-wise or losing their jobs or having to retrain, because you're going to find a situation where you have mismatched skills. So that is one thing I could see based on the conversation we've had today. From a business perspective, there's so much advantage in integrating voice assistants. So it could be that moving forward, because of all the benefits associated with voice assistants in terms of saving costs, enhancing productivity, and making sure that businesses progress more, it could be that in future, as my colleagues previously mentioned, there would be this push to have robots as well, in addition to voice assistants, and that could disrupt the traditional roles as we know it in many sectors.
Thank you, Dr. Ori. Nigel, just a really quickly brief comment on the question, please.
Yeah, on the specific question, I think one of the emerging technologies is actually privacy-centric computing. So we've been talking about this for a few years, but Apple actually released it in the iOS 18. I think it's going to use private cloud compute, which is effectively means that the cloud provider cannot see any data that's being processed. That's going to really help with privacy-centric applications, and also the move towards more edge-based devices as well. So intelligence on the edge, running voice assistants and large language models on the edge. Again, it helps with privacy. It means that people are much happier to interact. And so for some of these things that we were talking about before, like healthcare applications, maybe legal applications as well, people will feel much more comfortable knowing that their data is not going somewhere where it could be snooped upon by someone else.
Thank you, Nigel. And last but definitely not the least, we have Julie with us. Julie, could you please care for a very short comment on the question, please?
Yeah, I think in terms of emerging technologies, I'm really curious to see where this type of AI is where it's going. In the age of sustainability, it takes so much energy to train these models. And now it's not just about training an AI model, it takes a huge amount of energy to run, or can do, especially if we talk about generative AI. And to train those big foundation models, that they had to scrape half the internet. So are we going to scrape the other half? And then where do we go from there? Are we going to run out of data to train the next generation? And there is a lot of discussions happening, at government level, at society level, even global conversations around who owned the data that was used to train these models, and are people going to start taking more ownership over their own data? So I'm curious to see where the field is going, and will we see major advancements, or are we kind of going to plateau for a couple of years and really work out the benefit of the technology at the stage? And we talked about all the different use cases. So I'm curious to see where it's going to go.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much for your final comments. Thank you to all our panelists today. That was the end of the webinar. I would obviously like to thank Nigel, Sandy, Tom, Dr. Ori, and obviously Professor Julie for their time, and for joining us for this webinar on voice assistance and employment. Definitely, it has been a very lively discussion. To the people in the audience, your participation obviously made the discussion valuable and engaging as well. And I would like to say stay tuned for more updates and upcoming webinars from IORMA. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you everyone for attending our webinar today. Thank you also to the expert panelists who kindly contributed to this webinar. We do hope that you found the webinar informative, of interest and thought-provoking. We will let you know shortly after this live webinar when a full video of this will be available for you and/or your contacts to view at any time in the future. In the meantime, we hope that you will also be able to attend or view any of IORMA Future Centre, iorma.com, regular future online events, videos and reports to help you keep abreast of future trends and the inevitable fusion of humanity with technology. Thank you again.